Welcome to the Combat Learning Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Josh Peacock. Today I have Kabir Bath as a guest. He's an early success story in the ecological jiu-jitsu movement. He's a black belt under Rafael Lovato Jr., and he has a successful school, especially a large children's program. I'm going to do something a little bit different with this collection of episodes. I'm just going to throw you right into the episodes because in the first episode, Kabir does a great job of introducing himself. So I don't want to repeat information there. I think most of my listeners are eager to listen to most of the episodes that come out. And so it's not necessary for me to put a introduction on every single episode to sort of generate interest in the contents of the episode. Before I throw you into the episode, I launched a Substack, combatlearning.substack.com. And I have launched a series of articles that are companions to the book by Rob Gray, How We Learn to Move. So I take each chapter, I summarize it in my own words, and then I go into depth, applying it specifically to martial arts and combat sports, how it can make you a better coach, how it can make your understanding better, and of course, how to design better practices. So head on over to combatlearning.substack.com. And if you're not, sign up to the email list. Now, if you're already on the free email list, you're going to be getting emails through Substack from now on. And so if you want access to those companion articles and other articles such as, paper reviews, applying ecological and other types of science specifically to martial arts, most of those are going to be a part of a paid subscription. There's already a few of those up, and I'm about to release another one. So if you want access to those, it's $9 a month. That's the cheapest it's probably ever going to be. And in a little while, I'm actually going to raise the price up. So if you want to get on the paid newsletter and get access to all those different kinds of articles, those series and companion articles and paper reviews and all those sorts of things, make sure that you sign up as soon as possible because the price is going to go up. All right, guys, thank you. I will see you on the next episode. Welcome to the Combat Learning Podcast. If you could go ahead and introduce yourself, your martial arts background to my listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Kabir Bath. I'm a black belt in jiu-jitsu. I've been training for 18 years now, coaching for about 17 years of that. And this year will mark the 12th year of having my own school as well. So a lot of time on the mats, a lot of time as a coach. I'm a black belt under Lovato Jr. I'm sort of known in this space for a lot of what I've done with youth in terms of programs, delivery, but also a lot of stuff that I do with like coach education, things like that. But yeah, I'm just super excited to talk about coaching. My favorite thing is sort of what consumed me most about jiu-jitsu early on. So yeah, I'm excited to be here, Josh.
Sweet, man. That's near and dear to my heart, the coaching the kids and the youth. So we're definitely going to dig into that a little bit. But before we get there, I'd like to ask how you first heard about constraints-led approach and got into like ecological dynamics and all that.
Yeah. So for our school, right, youth was sort of what I set out like our first 10 years. The mission was build a great youth program. So naturally, because of that, I started seeing what do they do in youth activities that people actually play and get paid for and stuff like that eventually, the things that are scholastic sports. And I noticed a lot of little small mini games or things of that nature, particularly in like soccer, basketball type things. And while it wasn't applicable, I could say, they're just getting kids time on ball, which I realized, that's a really big thing. So I started to integrate that into a little bit of what we did. And, that leads to more digging into constraints. And eventually I found my way to like the Rob Grays and like the literature, let's say, and I went that way too. But it was really just that desire to be like, youth sports, because I know it's not supposed to be an adult class. That's for sure. Adult classes already sucked, but I knew it wasn't supposed to be like that. And I knew a lot of sports programs generally were doing a lot of lines, laps, lectures, that type of thing. So looking at like what the new movement in scholastic sports was, I'm like, that's what I want to try and focus on. And there was a lot of gameplay. There was a lot of just engaging in it. So that's sort of how it all started, is just trying to see what would be the best outcome for those kids.
Yeah, when I first started teaching kids, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do the kung fu movie traditional training, and we're going to sit in horse stance. And I'm going to make them do that for like 5 minutes. And
Hmm.
the classes were boring. The kids didn't like it. They didn't listen very well. And I had a bunch of behavioral problems, and they weren't getting better. So I was like, okay, well, that belief is shattered.
Yep.
So this idea that I had in my head from when I was a young man and I was learning martial arts, and then really an adolescent, and coming up to, my early 20s when I started to teach most actively. Um, I very quickly learned, like, all these ideas I had of the perfect training it wasn't reality. And so
Hmm.
I had to research, like, okay, well, what can I do? How can I keep these kids engaged? How can I give them a fun class? And then I started to experiment more with games. Now, at the time, I was not into ecological dynamics or anything. So a lot of the games really had nothing to do with training at all. They were just kind of vaguely conditioning related, like making your legs
Right.
strong or increasing dexterity or something. Um, and so that was my beginning. It was similar, but I think yours seemed like when you first got into it, it was a little bit more targeted to what we talk about now. Um,
Dude, I did the obstacle course that ends with a punch. Ooh, disguised
yep.
repetition, all that type of
Oh
stuff,
yeah.
like the games to sneak in,
Yeah.
and then they do a bridge escape, and then they run into like, I did it.
Yeah.
I played with all those things to think of
Yep.
how do I create that key engagement point? But it's so interesting to think of that, because it's just like what you lean on when you lack core skills. It's just
Hmm.
like in like grappling. When you don't have good basic stuff, you have a couple of Hail Mary things that you lean on that can make it look like grappling. Just like how sometimes as an early coach, you can do some stuff that makes it look like you're running a good practice. And like,
Right.
like those obstacle courses where the kids do a bridge, a sprawl, or whatever, they run around it. Like it looks like I'm coaching the shit out of these kids right now.
Yeah.
But, it's an interesting thing to think of. Um, but that's sort of what you do when you don't have the skill set. Because when you get really skilled, you realize your role is so different, and what it
Hmm.
looks like, and all those things are so different. It's just, it's fascinating because as you get more skilled, the less you do, the less bells and whistles there are to how I approach my practice. And you'll see that with everything. The way I started my business in the beginning, it was bells and whistles, and eventually like just product and quality. And I'm sure you see very similar things in other areas of life too.
Yeah, for sure. The mechanisms of motor learning and learning in general are basically universal.
Hmm.
We learn better through play, basically across the board. And we see that, like, my background is educational psychology before I got into motor learning, and that's what I did my master's degree in. So, like, looking at, I mean, I wrote papers about, like, how interspersing, like subject specific physical games enhanced
Hmm.
engagement, attention, and learning.
Hmm.
Because kids, people might think of that like, well, why would you get the kids all riled up in the middle of a class? How does that
Emotional.
how does that help them? How does that actually help them focus and improve
Yeah.
learning? And well, actually, come to find out that, hormonally and in terms of just the way kids are wired, especially young boys, you know, the cortisol release from the fun and the dopamine and all that kind of stuff, serotonin, all of that stuff enhances their ability to focus,
Hmm.
when properly channeled. And it also makes the experience more salient. So if it's something like math, that's a little bit more memory based than it is than motor learning. They can more easily remember that lesson or remember the principles that they have to use for mathematics. Um, so learning through play, I mean, the actual learning, the modalities that you use to learn the teaching strategies and stuff can be play based too, but like letting kids move their bodies as part of engaging in the subject, even if it's history, right? Even if
Hmm.
it's math, is extremely useful. It's extremely useful. And it will actually make the behavior better, not worse. Right.
Yeah.
So,
It's I'm sure you've heard like the old cliche, like motion creates emotion, and those type
right.
of things, but it's
Yeah.
literally true. When I can get you out of, a lower energy state. When we start ramping it up, it's just more potential for me to target that somewhere. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes people worry about riling up a student or a
Mhm.
class or whatever because they don't know that next step, but it's the
Yeah.
best thing. Like a class should, a practice should look almost on the brink of chaos, but not. Like somehow it's pretty high energy and they bring it in, and then
Yeah.
and then you bring it in. That's a good thing because like it's funny. I'm going a little bit all over the place, but think of like your traditional martial arts experience. The
Mhm.
discipline is because these kids can sit still so well. They are there sitting still. That doesn't show me a lot, right? But if I can take you from crazy chaos, and then when it's time to sit still, you suddenly can go back to your spot. Boom. That's like discipline, not
Yeah, it is.
having you stop an engagement, get that, like, and
Yep.
those are interesting things where we think we want to, we're trying to like play to the audience. Hey, I need to sell discipline. Let's say discipline looks like sitting in an orderly line, but to me, discipline looks like snapping back to the next task where you had to go, etc.
Yeah.
It's just funny to think, um, like sometimes we try and coach to bring out an attribute, but we're doing the wrong thing. Just it's not
Yeah.
like malicious. It's just that's what it looks like. Because most times I think most people aren't taught coaching either.
Yep.
Like it's interesting for you. You have a background in some education, but you also did martial arts like as a kid, correct? So
Yeah,
you
from
like
9 all the
came
way up,
up in
yeah.
martial arts. I
Yeah.
didn't do a single martial art until I was 20. And like my scholastic, like athletic experience was like nothing. Like I would do 4 weeks of everything and then quit the team. So it's like I didn't really get a lot of exposure there. So my only exposure was like my initial coaches. And they were like, hey, Kabir, guess what? Want to teach class? I'm like, sure. No guidance. So that sort of was good because it was very early on. Jiu-jitsu was already pretty like lax and weird. So just started exploring. Whereas like
Mhm.
for you, it must be different because you came from horse stance for 3 minutes, do
Yeah.
your pumse, right? Because Taekwondo for you mostly.
Mhm.
Yeah, right. So it's like it's so interesting. You overcame a bunch of conditioning of how you learn and do stuff and whatever. Whereas like yeah, it's very fascinating to me because I've
Yeah, it
noticed
is.
something with
It
a
was a
lot of
lot.
people who are super embracing is they mostly had to be self-taught for a portion of their journey, or they reached a level where their coach was disengaged, so they had to take ownership over their own progress. Like that seems to be a super recurring theme. I'm sure you've noticed it in speaking with some of your
Mhm.
guests and other people, but yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It wasn't until I was teaching so in the span of 2 years, I taught for the 1 year, I taught for, a local taekwondo master, and I had virtually no creativity in the
Mhm.
lesson plan design, and it was the same 2 lesson plans, by the way. We did 1 lesson plan 1 week and the B lesson plan the second week, and that is all we did, and people were paying like $140 a month for this, like 10 years ago. Like, it was highway robbery in terms of what
Wow.
you got. Um, and if I added something in, by the way, feedback from parents and kids, like, absolutely super positive. In fact, it was so positive that he was opening a second location that I was supposed to be in charge of. And he was afraid to take me off the location I was training on to put me on the second location, the new location, because he thought he would lose people after I started teaching. So um, I would get criticized after the lesson plan if I deviated at all.
Mhm.
Whether it was a positive, it was a new drill or a new something or other. Again, this is way before CLA or anything like that. I would get criticized, and it upset me. Like it killed my motivation to teach because I didn't
Mhm.
do anything wrong. I just didn't. I just substituted a drill or something. Like we still did the same techniques and everything. Um, and it wasn't until I left that job, and then a few months later, I got hired as the chief instructor of a brand new startup school in another town that I was able to rapidly iterate my program. So I
Mhm.
tried to do the traditional thing. It didn't work very well. I changed it very quickly. And then in a period of a few months, it was for we were working inside of a franchise.
Hmm.
like a Korean karate sort of franchise. So in a period of months, they had people from corporate coming down to study my mat and what I was doing so that they
Hmm.
could replicate it across other schools. And we had other nearby franchisees about, one was like an hour away, one was about 45 minutes away. Their instructors, most of whom were far outranked me in terms of the degree of black belt and the amount of time they were in martial arts. They were coming down. The franchisees were making them come down and watch my classes to
Hmm.
try and figure out what I was doing with these kids. And the corporate guy was like, "This is like the best mat I've seen in the entire company." And this is before CLA. This is just incorporating, doing the disguised repetition, right?
Yep.
Making sure that letting the kids scream as loud as they can during some of the drills, making sure that we're playing at least 2 games every class that are really fun for the kids that they like to do. Um, yeah, it's just remarkable how play changes the entire dynamic of a children's class, and they're more likely to listen to you actually,
Hmm.
and not present really poor behavior when you engage that way.
Yeah. So thinking of this, what's really interesting? We talk lots about how this is like so great for the end user, the athlete, right? But I have to say, it's super empowering for a coach. Okay.
Mhm.
Because when I know that it's okay for it to be chaotic, it's okay for it to be messy, and we're playing in this way, I have breathing room, right? I'm sure if you think of when you were coming up and things had to be A, B, C, and it was very strict, and there was mostly expectations around aesthetics rather than like what happened. It's a hard environment, right? Because then
Yeah.
also you have to manage behavior, like you mentioned. You have to do all these other things. Whereas if we're keeping a practice that has a great pace of play, there's peaks, there's values, there are valleys, there's resets, there's all those good things that happen, behavior goes away, like you said. And here's the fun thing for a coach, you wanted to coach, to say something meaningful to a kid, and it helped them have a better effect when they got to play the game. So now you shift your coach's role from something they didn't want to be, right? They actually didn't want to be the information teller person, right? They
Mhm.
wanted to be the guide anyways, but begrudgingly, they sort of accept, okay, I have to be this guy too. But they just wanted to do the part when the kid is sparring anyways. That's why they started coaching,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So it sets them up to be like,
Yep.
the sooner I can put you in a zone where you can just do well, awesome, and you build your confidence, all these other things. So, uh, uh, yes, the kids benefit is huge, and I think a lot of us know that. But sometimes you have to think of it from like the activity designer, the person running the session. It's really, it allows them to one run better, but also just like, if I'm making my own game or I'm doing whatever, I know where I want this to go. I can be responsive. I can be reactive, which a good coach should, right? I have to watch the room and know, do we progress or do we stay on this? Or do I change? Do I scale this up? Do I scale this down? So one of the big benefits is it really makes it easier for the coach to do what they want to do, which is coach, and think about the jujitsu or the whatever the sport or activity is, rather than making them sit still, making them do this, whatever. All that sort of takes care of itself when they're already buzzing high.
For sure. That's an important insight because I think coaches are afraid to take the leap because the instruction based stuff and the sitting still and all that is like a crutch. It's
Hmm.
familiar. They've done it for a long time. Even if it's ultimately more frustrating and less effective, they know it. And they know they can get a certain level of result from it, no
Hmm.
matter how they do it. The ecological dynamics, the CLA, the play based stuff is it's far out for them. Like there's a chasm they have to leap, even though it's much more fun. But you mentioned that thinking about it from the coach's perspective, when you take that leap and you take a play based approach to class, and by play based, I don't mean what I was doing, way
Hmm.
back when I was, uh, you know, first time I was a chief instructor. I mean, play as in the game, sparring, or if you're a kata or a punse coach, that's a little bit different. But there's still play that you can do there. But in terms of sparring, it becomes more interesting for you as the coach when it's a play based. session design. So if you can
Yeah.
just get past the crutch, you're going to reignite your love for the game. That was my coach's feedback to me. I met I think I've said this story before, but I met my coach. He had listened to my podcast before I came to train with him. And
Mm.
so I looked at the time, it was a relatively new gym. I looked up at I asked him a question through his Facebook page or something. I asked him how much they sparred because I didn't want to go
Yeah.
to another jiu-jitsu gym where there's 45 minutes of technique and like 10 minutes of sparring. And since I've been there, he's listened to the podcast and he's taken the advice from the podcast to totally change the way he does class. And he said that that shift in his mind, that shift in his paradigm, once he took the leap, totally reignited his passion for coaching. And he didn't need any extra passion when I first met him,
Hmm.
but it got him firing on all cylinders at that point, because now there's this whole new ocean of ideas and interesting things to play with to enhance and coach your learners and make them better martial artists.
Yeah. Something interesting here. So again, I'm flipping the lens. Often I talk about the feedback loop of a student when they're in this thing. They get all that great touches, all that positive stuff.
Yep.
For me as a coach, okay, assuming I love coaching and I love seeing aha moments happen for my students, right? When we're drilling and they just do a rep perfect, no, neither of us has an emotional result of that being awesome. I, as a coach, great, you did a static movement, let's say. You as a student, awesome. I know the things. But when we can help you have an aha moment, the aha moments happen in training. So when I see you finally do a thing, or we can coach you through a thing in live time, that hits. And that's my positive feedback loop as a coach. That's exciting. That's invigorating. You can all think of a time where you showed someone something, and it's when you saw them do it in a live setting that as a coach, you're like, boom, nailed it. Like,
Yeah.
that's awesome. Hell yeah, Nick, you did that. That's great. Like, and for a coach, it's important to stoke that fire, because if I make class so rote that I'm unengaged with your progress, huge problem, right? My
Yep.
main priority is to be engaged with your progress. That's the name of the game, because even if you came every day and it was fun and we were best friends and man, we chest bump and it's sick, if you don't feel progress or feel seen when you're making progress, it's going to end eventually, right? So for us, it allows us to be a lot more focused on that, giving the feedback, nudging people, because we're here for that, right? We want to grow and we want to be seen when we grow, and helped to do that along the way.
Yeah. I mean, that's another great insight. Like the kid doesn't just, and the student, I mean, this applies adult and children.
Hmm.
They don't just become disengaged with the boring monotony of an instruction technique based class. You become disengaged, right?
Yeah.
We get a lot of us get into coaching because we want to skip to the coaching serious athletes for competition part. That's
Yeah.
the part we wanted to do, right? Um, but you have to do everything else to get there. And
Hmm.
along the way, you get disengaged with that middle process with beginners and stuff. And a lot of in the
Hmm.
traditional martial arts, a lot of the instructors just they toss it off to kids who are barely older than the people in the class, or to some, a college student that's got a first or second degree that's just there 4 times a
Hmm.
week to make, a criminal paycheck
Yeah.
to make $8 an hour. Um, they become disengaged, and it's just not, you're looking for what they did wrong and you're not looking for what they did right. When it's play based, it's so chaotic that most of the time they're not, most of the time it's messy. And so your attention is already intrinsically primed to look for when they do something that looks good, because you
Hmm.
don't see that from most of the students.
Yeah, because it's like, if I look at a floor and everyone's doing the same thing, nothing really stands out, let's say. Right? But when
Yep.
I get to see, like for us, most things we do, we will play the same game several iterations with group feedback and touch points between a round of engagement. And then you can see that and address that. I want to go back to something you mentioned, just
Sure.
because we talked about coaches and how it's like, hey, they aspire to want to work with the like hardcore, whatever people, that are awesome in their game and whatever. So I think of that. Obviously, yes, that's naturally tempting, etc. Cool. Who wouldn't
Hmm.
want that? But the thing is I just want to point out we like that because we don't have to have the skill of being able to motivate someone or
Right.
create that motivation in someone.
Yeah.
We all want to work with the guys who are intrinsically motivated because that's the easiest thing on earth. But how can I get someone from like apathy to moving a little bit further along that line of engagement? Right? Especially when, let's say, you have youth, you have families that are bringing you a kid, like, yo, please help this kid light a fire. Right. So that's like a crucial skill because it's something I talked about somewhere else is like, we, an, a novice instructor, let's say, and myself included, very guilty of this. We focus on the 10 best kids and the 10 most challenging kids, and we ignore the 80 kids in the middle that make up the majority of our program.
Hmm.
Right? Because those top two are those the best, not saying they're the best and the worst, but the two extremes, they're the easiest to feel like you're doing good. I made that kid sit straight. Boom. I made this kid hit a sick armbar. Easy. But the middle, they're just floating. So how can I get, it's a big skill. Because really great coaches, you hear them talk about creating culture and stuff. A culture is just your ability to move everyone in the same direction. Right. So it's like a skill that while it's not directly related to like the combat, the learning side of things, but creating an engaged learner very much is sort of the prerequisite. So how can you motivate, connect with people? That's why like my whole coaching philosophy, the first thing is connection, right? I got to be able to connect to a person, know the person. So I know how do I challenge them, what pushes, what pulls them from things, like that's why I always say connection is the first thing. I could have the sickest technical information, understanding, mastery of the sport. But if Josh doesn't feel like we have a connection, when I give you feedback, will you take it? When I challenge you, will you receive it the right way? Right. And if we want people to learn, you have to know the athlete, which is why, like, it's that's a challenging thing. But some people will skip it. But I feel like connection is without that, I can't make you good. I can't challenge you. I can't, it's just, yeah, a little rant, but I think that ties in. It's like this
No,
thing that
that
you see so often in coaching.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's like I was like, "Whoa, this dude's my twin up in Canada." Connection is the relationship. So I wrote an article many years ago. I don't think it's on the internet anymore. It might still be. That was circulated in that franchise a little bit. And one of the first things I said in that article was your relationship with, especially with regarding teaching children, because that was the main topic. Your relationship with the child learner is the most important piece of this puzzle. Praise, correct praise, sandwich method,
Mhm.
disguise repetition, games at the end or whatever. These are all like little tactics, anchors,
Mhm.
things like that. All the Montessori things you can think of for tricking kids into behaving for an hour. Um, those are bells and whistles. The
Mhm.
fundamental, the foundation rather of kids that behave in class that are engaged and that want to come. That's the big one that want to come there to train is your relationship, your personal relationship with them for the hour that they're there. Um, I measure that success based on how motivated or how excited that kid is to tell me about their day or what they're thinking about when they come in or afterwards.
Mhm.
Um, and I take when a kid wants to go off on a tangent in the middle of a class, I take that. I have to quell it, right? Because it's going to waste time. I asked them to talk to me about it after class because that's a good thing. And the reason why I
Oh
say
yeah.
that's a good thing is because I had a jujitsu coach and I helped him coach the kids for a little bit as a white belt who was totally, he could not talk to the kids. He didn't listen to what they
Mhm.
said. The kids knew he wasn't listening to what he's saying because they would say something to him and then he would respond like an AI chatbot from like 2 years ago.
Yep.
Um, and And it broke my heart because the kids, he always had behavioral problems. He wasn't listening to the kids weren't engaged, and they wanted to connect with him. They tried
Mhm.
so hard to connect with him, and he just stayed at the distance and didn't stayed at a distance and didn't listen to them.
Mhm.
And so it's the most important thing. It's the thing that you can't teach to a coach. You can tell them that you need to have a relationship, but there are no quick tactics. You can't make somebody pretend to be interested in what you have to say, right? You're either
Yeah, I have
interested
thoughts.
in people, you're either
Yeah.
interested in people, you're either interested in your students or you're not interested in them.
Yeah. So I have thoughts on this. I believe like so let's talk about a couple things here. So when you talk about like, hey, that coach that just doesn't connect or see the value in letting this tangential behavior run its course, right? Because it's hard. Like, okay, cool. Like I remember one time, maybe like really early on in owning my academy, I had a kid who was like 5 or 6, maybe 5. And he was like, "Hey, coach, want to see how high I can count?" And in my head, I'm like, "Oh, this is going to be a long time." Dude went to 121. And I just sat there and watched this kid count. Okay. But in a world for a kid where most times that is pushed aside or quelled real fast, or, oh, cool, wow, that's pretty good counting, which someone will say after they hit number 7. But being able to like, because here's the thing: when a kid wants to share something with you, um, it's a big thing for them. Think of you as a grown human with some semblance of confidence, knowing things you want to do. If you share something with me, you might still have feeling. And I'm not even a person who is like a figure of authority, let's say. So when they're
Right.
down to do that, you have to recognize that it's not just them saying stuff. It's like a really big give, let's say, right? They're really opening themselves. And every time you catch that, you just add a huge layer. And it seems so innocuous, right? But we can all think as adults as the one time where somebody didn't like blow us off, but they just didn't really hear me or see me.
Yeah.
And now I'm 10% disengaged. And 10% is a lot of disengagement. Hey, a company has a 10% swing in profits, they are in serious trouble sometimes. Same thing for your like a student. You have to think of how delicate that margin of them staying forever. Not that that's the only goal, but that's the idea of them continuing to engage in sport or quit, right? And when you realize you're playing with really narrow margins, then your practice design becomes more the intentional way that you learn to connect with people. Because like
Mhm.
I have forced people who don't talk to humans at all to learn how to talk to, not force them. They train, they're part of whatever. But there's ways, but the thing is I find most people just don't see it as a big thing. A lot, just like the connection is so easy to skip because that's not nuts and bolts. That's not like push this button. Hey, that's an investment approach, right?
Yeah.
Connection for coaching is like building brand for business. Man, does it look like nothing until you hit a snowball effect, right? It's
Yeah.
very similar, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know instructors, they'll say, well, you know what? I'm not going to invest in this person until they've proven that they're going to be here for the long haul. But they're more likely to be there for the long haul if you invest in them up front. I mean, instructors, I guess, and coaches rather, stop being a wuss. You're afraid your heart's going to get broken because you like somebody and they quit 3 months later.
Mhm.
Like
Man, I see this with school owners who are like, man, should I really teach this instructor everything I know? Because what if
Uh,
they leave? But it's like, bro, what if they stay and they don't know shit and all your classes suck? Your kids hate martial arts. You're a bit like, I'd rather, like, it's a really short sighted, weird thing to not want, to be afraid that they might go anyways. But if you don't
is
invest
what
in
you
them and they
know
leave, they have a
really
negative.
is
If you
is
invest in them and they leave, they have a positive. I'm choosing a positive, bro. Like I
right.
don't,
It's an
but
easy. It
it's like
should
a
be
scarce
easy.
thing about their energy. Like I only have so much time to invest. It's like, bro, your full time job is investing in humans. whether it's you or through your
Mhm.
ability to influence a team to do that. But it's literally what you signed up for. You better, it's always boggled my mind.
Yeah, like, is this instructor actually going to undercut what you do at your school? Is everything that you do hinging on like hidden knowledge of some sort? It in and like we just said, if you invest in him, that relationship grows. The more the relationship grows, the less likely that person is to leave. Because as an authority figure, this person is like, oh, I'm under this guy's wing. He's nurturing me. I like that. Right.
Mhm.
Obviously, you have unscrupulous people that are just, you know,
Right.
they're just unscrupulous and they're willing to undercut you. Most people aren't like that. Um, and it's really not that hard to do. And you said we're in the people business. Why do you expect why do you expect your learners and your students to have this commitment to your school? They don't know you from Adam. They just show up,
Mhm.
they sign the dotted line. They're like, oh, this is cool. I think I'm interested in this. But you have no commitment to them. You're there 100% of the time. They're not. Like, how do you
Oh
not
yeah.
have this commitment to your learners? It doesn't whether it's their first day on the mat or not. You have a commitment to the art. Why not to the people actually
Mhm.
who actually express the art, the people who actually do it?
Yeah. I thought it was jujitsu for everyone, not just jujitsu for those who care enough. Like,
Yeah,
uh,
those who get it past blue belt or whatever.
yeah, exactly. It's a fascinating thing.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So how radically has your program changed since you got in? Like, what did it look like before you got to the ecological approach, and then now, what does it look like now?
Yeah. So y- let's say both youth and adult side between like right post COVID, I'd explored so much about learning, but before I was the hardest of hardcore traditional, do some warm up, 10, 15 minutes, do 20 to 30 minutes. At least I had a related area and like structure to the way I was living it, but some sort of thing there, live sparring. Eventually, though, I started to play with more like live games. Hey, starts from here, go live, like, progression. But my youth class was already like 80% game space. They would learn like one move and they would do two different sort of sparring games. So my program didn't go from like 100% old school to 100% new school. I've been like slowly bridging that gap. For my kids, it was literally like I changed 15 minutes of practice. Oh, wow, it's all eco now. For my adults, it was more because, I changed like two-thirds of practice, in that sense. Um, but it was like a super smooth transition because of that, because my students were already used to occasionally training in different modalities, right? And that we would do
Mhm.
some things with mixed resistance or with some constraints, like, hey, the old classic defend your guard, no hands, or like, they were used to sprinkling in different things to get better, right? Which I think was also interesting. Is like for us, people already think about getting better, not about learning cool moves, if that makes sense. They wanted to roll better already. So when we transitioned, it was really easy because, like, oh, cool, I'm just getting so much mat time on all these areas. I feel like I don't
Yeah.
plateau, whatever. And that was sort of like the transition. But when I went all the way, I just full stop because I had listened to podcasts with Greg, talked with him, and I was like, I'm already a little bit there. I'm just going to commit to 4 weeks of 100%. So then I just committed. I taught all the classes. I had my coaches attend all the classes that they were supposed to teach and just see me do it for, a couple of weeks so that they could have fun in the class and then know what that experience is like. And that was sort of our transition. Now we're all eco on an average day. We run 5 or 6 sessions every, 5 days a week. So we rack up a lot of volume. If you think of it, it's been a year and a half now, 30 sessions a week. It's a lot of experimentation time of just playing with it. But also an interesting thing for me is I'm not always the direct facilitator, right? I'm a step removed.
Mm,
So I have coaches that sometimes have to exact a plan or a lesson and things like that. So it's been an interesting sort
right.
of implementation.
Yeah, I wanna dig into that in a second. Before we get to actually how you've approached coaching your coaches ecologically, I guess you could say, or attempting to figure out how to do that. Um, I am interested to know how your beliefs about the nature of learning have changed. So we've talked about how how the actual structure of the class is. So
Mhm.
do you believe differently about how learning actually occurs? Do you believe differently about that?
Um, yes, but like if we want to think of what I used to think, right? I was definitely
Mhm.
repetition, study, that type of thing, which was boilerplate. Hey, 10,000 reps. Let's do it. We're tracking it on this chalkboard at the gym, whatever it is. Um, but it definitely has because I've realized that so much of what we teach, what we do, etc., could be simplified if we thought about their learning different, right? And now, like, the way I view learning is just about focus, really. Can I just have you focus on the thing and then you'll get acquaint, you'll get in line with it a little bit more, figure it out. Because now I feel like, man, I'm about to have a whole batch of blue belts that have never like drilled a move as part of practice. Sure, maybe they've troubleshot, stress test a position after whatever, that type of stuff of work.
Sure.
But it's so fascinating to watch the way that they ask questions, the way that they engage with training, because they have like a whole level of complexity that's removed from like their mind of like cataloging strategies or not strategies, techniques and whatever. Right. And because of that, it's not so much my view of learning that's changed, but the way that I communicate grappling has changed. Probably because I recognize like what is actually important in the process of them practicing and like, everything
Right.
there. Um, but it was just so apparent to me, like, learning is trial and error. That was the biggest reaction. Learning is trial and error. Learning is not perfecting, right? Learning is falling, getting back up. Yo, I fall a lot. Yeah, you fall a lot because this happens. You can't control this. Got it. Like that was, of course, we knew that, right? But like, did people come to fail a lot in a session or feel cool about doing something? But it was like, I understand people do want that. That's the other thing about learning was like how important challenge point is and things like that, which became more apparent here because here I have to address challenge point in my practice activity, all these things. Like, there's that layer that, if I'm going to make learning good, I have to think of this practice activity. That sort of whole element would say is where my view of learning changed the most is because I never connected the practice activity with the learning. I connected the information. Hey, this is the detailed process by
Right.
which
Yeah.
that's the learning. But now I'm realizing the learning is how do I calibrate this activity to force this like that. I would say is my biggest viewpoint change.
Mhm. Yeah. Learning is a process of becoming more skilled, which you only become more skilled by navigating the actual environment. Not by
Hmm.
information is supplemental. Information about it is supplemental. It's helpful. It directs your
Hmm.
attention. So when you come out of a role and you're like, wow, that movement was I didn't quite catch what was going on. That was kind of cool. And you kind of break it down a little bit in a dead way, I guess you could say. Um, and you break it down a little bit. That's not a learning event, but it is supplemental to learning
Hmm.
because it helps you understand what's going on in a bite not a bite size, but it helps you understand some of the things that you missed in the role that can then calibrate your attention for when you're actually doing it live, right? So there is an effect there that's useful. Um, what's important there, I think, for people that are now listening to this and saying, we got him. Josh admitted that you can do instruction. You can do technique instruction as part of class. Um, First of all, it's more like breaking it down. It's more like dissecting it than it is instruction. But even if there is an instructive part of it, it's first of all very quick. There's virtually no reps involved, um, and it happens after the problem presented itself.
Hmm.
So that is really pedagogically that is extremely important. It's paramount, in fact, that you um, that you break something down or introduce a tip or a very discrete piece of information that could be helpful after a problem has been experienced, not in anticipation, not in what you're generally going to find, not in this could happen in a world championship match in 2018. All that stuff, that's not, you can't do instruction based on a Rolodex of all the possible things that could happen in a match. So, but yeah, I ended up on a rabbit trail there because I knew somebody was gonna listen to that and say, "Oh, he gave up the argument and admitted you can do instruction."
So check it out. So I 100% will do that, but the way it happens is intentional, right? I don't present the information without you experiencing a problem first. And that's
Mm,
the biggest thing. Because any instructor here can think of, you have a first day white belt student in class. Why am I going from side control to neon belly in this way? What is this? What is neon belly? Or like, like those things lack context, right? But if we played a
right.
game, it's like, yo, hold this person down from side control. Hey, we play around. Some good tools you could use. Don't forget, you can use your shins to pin. You can use your, like pointing them towards the tool. That's gonna like that makes sense. Oh, I would use this type of pin. But if we just start with the pin, it means nothing, right? And you're gonna ask me
Right.
something. And the reason, like, here's the interesting thing. People get so mad about what if questions that people ask. They're asking what if because they don't know what's happening at all. Period. First. So that you know what I mean? Like they're asking what happens if this happens because they're not sure what's really happening in the first place. If that makes sense, So like
Yep.
I don't have
Yeah.
enough experience with this. So maybe if I ask about some hypotheticals, I can use that to like infer what should happen all the time. You know what I mean? So like we skip that.
Hmm.
We just throw them in there. For example, this
Yeah.
week, we're introducing rear body blocks to people. First round, standing rear body lock. Just stay behind them. Defenders trying to get a wizard or face you. I let them play. And I was like, guys, when we're playing, a couple things to focus on. My hips lower than theirs, gonna give me a huge advantage. And remember, don't be static. Why don't you try switching which side your head is on when they try and defend? Just play with those two things. Be mindful of those next round. Boom, right? And then I send them out there and they have a
Hmm.
reason to do that because they just failed a bunch of times. And now I give them two things that'll help, right? Their hip position and the way they move their head. But if I just started, okay, guys, we're gonna do rear body lock training. Like even if it ran eco, in a live setting, if I start, hey, when we're here, remember we focus on tight elbows, we can control their hips, our head, our hips lower. Remember when we start, like no one will hear any of that. And then everyone will hold their rear body lock, interlocking their fingers or something crazy. But I want to start them with like the most basic thing. Yeah, we're going to start locked hands behind them, stay chest to back long as you can, run it. And then we'll add a little bit more, context and stuff. So I do it all the time. Like I give specific stuff, but it's like in that sense, I didn't say we're like do A, B, and C. It's like you can try and do stuff like this to deal with problems like that, right? Which is like an interesting way to put it. Like I don't want to say, hey, do this when they do that. It's like, when they do stuff like that, maybe it's this or that, like or the other way I'll address things are like, what's the mechanism? Like, what isn't happening to their body that we need to make happen? Right. If someone asks me, like, try like all the time, I'll probably the main thing, hey coach, this triangle choke, how can I make it tighter? And it's like that's like one of the easiest positions to be like, let me hyper perfect put you into the perfect angle, da, 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 right? But if I can
Yeah.
explain, hey, remember the triangle, right? Trying to force a shoulder into a neck. So we need that gap small. Just throw your legs up. Look at how when you turn, the more you turn, the more you point your feet, man, the smaller that gap is, right? So that means angle is super important. Let's try and just hunt more angle. And they're like, explain that idea. That's the mechanism. Because if I know what the mechanism is, it's like a weird thing, but it's like math when I can like proof the problem to see if I'm doing it right or wrong. Like I'm trying like it's just not there. I'm not creating that effect. But now I know what that effect that we're trying to create is. I'm trying to get compression of shoulder into neck by making that gap between my legs smaller. How do you usually do it? Usually through
Mm,
angle, right? Usually through angle. But we do know there's other ways you can make that gap small. You can TB choke someone, reach up there and make things smaller through
right.
extension of your legs, right? But just that idea. So that is like, hey, I will give you discrete info, but it's not going to be A, B, C. It's this is what you're trying to achieve. This is why,
Right.
So yeah, that's
Yeah.
my retort to the giving info. I definitely will give you info. I'm not just like fuck around, find out, bro. And sit there. But yeah.
Yeah, just find out, dude. Just whatever. I mean, there are people that believe that, but I don't think anybody that's promoting CLA or eco in the martial arts space is like a pure self-organization kind of person. But the information you gave is are basic. It's general enough that it's an effect that you can organize towards. So there is a self-organization effect, even though there's also a principle there that's helpful for organizing yourself in a more functional way to get what you want out of that game. So
Hmm.
that makes it more useful. I've also, it's funny because it's like, I've never said that you can't do any sort of instruction. It's just where, when, and how that you
Yeah.
do the instruction that's important. It's like you can't start the session with, okay, here's this hyper specific context, and we're going to do a bunch of largely contextless slices, tiny little slices of how to move from a mount to an arm bar, right? And there's no aliveness or anything, and the information is very low in terms of how it translates to if you ever found yourself there in a role anyways. um that's what I'm against, right? If you want to come in and hit with an effect or a principle or an external cue or something like very like something that is very compact, right? Not 5 minutes of lecture,
Hmm.
or like you said, coming in and like placing their body in the exact angle and adjusting the grip. Like I've seen that happen. I've seen people do that
Hmm.
before. Like freeze, stop there, and then like manipulate your limbs all over. Like, this is where it's supposed to be. That's no, not that stuff. It's if you want to come in and offer a tip, and even Rob Gray thinks this is kosher within constraints led approach.
Hmm.
If you want to come in and offer an information constraint that will help either guide search or clear up like one individual detail, that's fine. But you have to remember that you can't do that for every single person on the mat. So you
Hmm.
have to be very judicious about when you do it and with whom you do it and why. Um, and it's never the first part of a pedagogical process. It is after you experience a problem and you run into a real problem you've experienced, and it solves something that the the student is experiencing in a representative way, then, not before they get to the rolling, not before they get to the situational sparring.
Hmm. Just thinking of, when you talk about like the instructor that wants to correct the person, hey, put them in this place or whatever, like I sort of do that, but it's going to be this like, hey, you just got caught in this in live training. Let's rewind that. You're here.
Mhm.
What's happening? Right? He has your wrist control. Like, that
Yep.
is one of the best ways of feedback. Let's run it back. Can you do that for everyone? No. Can you do it for a couple people each session across a long enough timeline that you hit everyone? Absolutely. Right. But like that feedback hits right away because they just had a negative thing that makes their attention on that last exchange super high. So whatever you say next, they're hitting it for sure. Like that's my most common type of feedback is like rewind
Yeah.
or.
Yeah. Questioning and reflection are really important parts of the constraints led approach to coaching. Um, and yeah, you can probably over a long enough timeline, you can get to every student. But also you can train them into asking those questions themselves. So it's not just the coach, but
Hmm.
it's the learners operating on themselves and each other, pointing things out to each other, asking questions to each other. Now everyone can get multiple touches of that throughout the course, even if the coach can't touch every single learner during the course of that session. Um, so now you have it coming from both directions.
Hmm.
And everyone's becoming self-sufficient as a learner in the process.
Yeah.
Which I would hope coaches would want, but some coaches secretly just want to be the guy. They don't
Yeah.
want to be, they just want to be
yeah.
the guru.
Mm-hmm. You know what, like the thing is think of all your best practitioners in your school, your club, or on your team. They all at some point became a self-engaged learner. They took direction, right? So you have to facilitate that, right? And the fastest way I find is like when I'm broad, you come back to me with specific questions and specific challenges in the situation for, big things like that. Like that's what I want to be sort of pushing you towards, right? And the thing is, it's really interesting. Something that I got away from, you just mentioned, and I was doing for a long time, mainly like because of Preet Mickelson. He gave me a big influence on this. Like, yo, what if after your games or your rounds, you tell Kabir something he did good, what you noticed, something bad. Kabir, tell Josh the same thing. We're going to play the same game, implement what they shared. I'm like, oh man, I forgot. You just reminded me of that right now. Like, I forgot, because if we can create that in the room, there's not one coach and 20 students. There's now 21 coaches and 20 students, right? Which would be the game changer. I picked that up from one of my friends. It's that mindset shift. I'm like, oh shit, that's got to be like my next evolution. Let's say I know is that now too, but that's sort of the game. But it's like, there's so many things we can do. But notice none of that was me saying do A, B, and C. It's me saying ask questions about A, B, and C.
Yeah, absolutely. That dovetails again back to something I want to circle back to with coaching coaches ecologically, right? How do you train coaches to do what you do as an ecological coach or a constraints-led coach? And I would argue that it begins with when they're learners, like actually training them to recognize in themselves and their peers to help them notice and work through things on their own, become self-sufficient. But from a professional perspective, what do you do with the coaches that teach under you professionally to train them to do what you do? Thanks so much for listening to the Combat Learning Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, remember to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or your podcatcher of choice. It really helps us out. Finally, this episode, including the intro music, is produced by Micah Peacock. Thanks in advance, and I'll see you on the next episode.